Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and review 16 just because it is a bit more of a complex problem because you do have three fractions that are being subtracted and added. So it can get a little bit complex. So we want to go ahead and we have the sum and the difference in this rational quotient shown below. We want to simplify the expression that represents the sum and the difference. So we basically just want to simplify it, want to rewrite it in a different way. Now, the first thing that you should recognize here is that this denominator is a trinomial. So you're going to want to factor that out. And this 6 minus x is going to throw things off a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and just factor out a -1 and rearrange the order of those. So I'm going to go ahead and just do my factoring tree or my factoring t, where I'm going to put the -6 on the outside and the -5x on the right, on the right side. So the numbers that multiply to -6 but add up to a -5, because remember, these need to be multiplied, these need to be added. I'm going to go ahead and just say -6 times 1, because a -6 plus 1 is going to give me a -5. So that means that the factors here I'm going to have are x minus 6 and then x plus 1. So instead of writing x squared minus 5x minus 6, I'm going to be using these two factors right here. Now for the 6 minus x, like I said, I'm going to factor out a -1, basically divide by a -1, which is then going to leave me to a -6 plus x in parentheses with a -1 on the outside. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to rearrange the order because I want the x to be first and the number to be last. So I'm going to have -1 times x minus 6. So instead of writing 6 minus x, I'm going to be writing -1 times x minus 6. So now I'm going to go ahead and rearrange my expression with my new factors. I have 1 over x plus 1 minus 5x minus 2 divided by my the factors that I'm going to use instead of the trinomial. So I'm going to use x minus 6, x plus 1, plus x divided by -1 times x minus 6. Okay, by doing so, this is going to allow me to see what the denominators have in common, what they don't have in common, and whatever they don't have in common to make sure to multiply by it to the given fraction that does not have the missing factor in the denominator. So I see that 2 out of the 3 fractions have an x minus 6. So that means that the fraction that doesn't have an x minus 6, I'm going to multiply that by that, and just remember what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Now, the next thing that I do see is that I have an x plus 1. And I notice that 2 out of the 3 fractions have an x plus 1, and therefore the fraction does not have an x plus 1, I will go ahead and give it an x plus 1. But I just need to remember that what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Now, the one other additional thing that you may overlook and you may not see, but you should, is going to be this -1. So that means that my other fractions also need to be multiplied by a -1. But what I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. Okay, so now that I have that done, I'm going to rewrite my expression with my new factors. So that way they can all have the same denominator, because again, you cannot add or subtract fractions unless they have the same denominator. So that means I'll have -1 times x minus 6. Anything times 1 is honestly just 1, so that doesn't even matter. Minus a -1 times 5x minus 2 plus x times x plus 1. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put all of that as one fraction because I know for a fact that they now all have the same denominator, okay? Because I made sure of that. If they didn't have the same denominator, I would not be able to add them or subtract them. So now I'm going to go ahead and distribute my terms, basically multiply them so that way I can start combining like terms and whatnot. So I'm going to start with a negative 1 times x, which is going to be a negative x. A negative 1 times a negative 6, which is a positive 6. I'm not going to do anything with the subtraction yet, but so that means I'm still going to continue to use the parentheses. But I will multiply this negative 1 times 5x, which is a negative 5x. And a negative 1 times a negative 2, which is a positive 2. Close my parentheses. The plus isn't going to do anything. You only really need to be aware of subtractions or negatives. So x times x is going to be an x squared, and x plus 1, or times 1, is going to be a 1x. Again, all of this continuing to be divided by the same denominator. Okay, so my next additional thing is going to be to multiply this negative inside because I still haven't gotten rid of all of my parentheses. Okay, so then that'll be negative x plus 6. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive 5x, and a negative times a positive is going to be a negative 2 plus x squared plus 1x. All of this still continuing to be divided by a negative 1, x minus 6, and an x plus 1. Now that I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and combine like terms. So negative x plus 5x plus 1x are going to go together. And the other terms that I see that are in common are going to be the 6 and the negative 2. So then that is going to leave me with an x squared, because I like to put the powers of 2 first. And then negative 1 plus 5 is going to be 4, plus 1 is going to be 5x. And then 6 minus 2 is going to be a plus 4. All of this divided by a negative 1 times x minus 6 times x plus 1. Now, I do look at the answer choices, and I do not see my answer up there. This here is negative, and then this here is also a minus. When I have pluses, also this minus 8 does not count. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that out. This numerator does not match with what I got, so I'm going to cancel this out. So that means that I still need to do some sort of simplification, so that way it looks something like answer choices A and D. So I do see that my numerator here is a trinomial, so that means that I'm going to factor this out using my little t. And I'm going to put the 4 on the left and the plus 5x on the right. Remember, these numbers need to multiply, and these numbers over here need to add. So that means 4 times 1 gives me 4, but 4 plus 1 equals to 5. So that means that my numerator is going to be the factor of x plus 4 times x plus 1. So if I rewrite it, I'm going to have x plus 4 times x plus 1 divided by my denominator of negative 1, x minus 6, x plus 1. What terms are in common? Well, the terms that are in common are the x plus 1s. So that leaves me with x plus 4 divided by negative 1 times x minus 6. Now, I do see A and D that have an x minus 6. So that means that I need to get rid of this negative 1 because I don't see a negative 1 in my denominator. So that means that x and 4 have to be divided by a negative 1. If I get x divided by a negative 1 and the plus 4 divided by a negative 1, that's going to give me negative x minus 4. So my numerator has to have a negative x minus 4. Therefore, my answer is D. I know this problem has a lot of information, but it is a very, very complex problem with a lot of skills being combined into one. So you have to pause the video, rewind, and then go through it again. Like, go ahead and do so. It is a challenging and complex problem, so it does make sense. But that is how you would solve this problem.